Good morning again. Thanks for the invitation. And after listening to all the talks so far, I feel like this could be the title of the whole symposium. So I'm going to highlight the word monitoring a little bit more. So I do a lot of work on trying to use these wearable devices to monitor patients and specifically focus on determining how accurate they are in what they measure. Not this one, it's not advancing. All right. Taking a step back, part of the research that I do is focused on novel wearable devices, such as gas chromatography to analyze human sweat. We have a project ongoing to analyze these signals to identify 21 different diseases. Can I advance this one simultaneously? Oh, okay. Another project that I've worked on as a postdoc was using a piezoelectric based device, a ring, to measure cardiac output and systemic vascular resistance. All right, so you're probably not planning to develop your own sensors for your study, so you're most likely looking at what's available for you to purchase. And one option is clinical grade devices that are offered by various companies, VivaLink, iRhythm, BodyGuardian, etc. These are great devices. They're like very accurate. A lot of them are FDA approved, like ECG patches, BP cuffs, temperature monitors, etc. And they're usually offered in a bundle, but they're pretty expensive. So if you want high quality data, this is the path to go. But most likely, you're looking at things like smartwatches. And these watches claim to measure a lot of things like heart rate variability, pulse oximetry, activities like distance, steps, floors, etc. For example, I'm working on a project that's trying to combine these devices with other sources of data like EHR, ECG, etc., to predict heart failure onset. But if you're doing a study like this, you're probably asking, like I did at the beginning, how accurate are they anyways? And you may start looking at the literature to answer that question, and you come across a ton of papers that have tried to answer that question. But there are some limitations that limit the amount of knowledge that you can gain from these publications. One is, if you're specifically looking at older patients, elderly and patients, these subjects spend most of their time indoors. I think on average, older subjects spend 85% of their time indoors, and when they're outside, they're not doing strenuous activity. So you need to make sure that your measurements indoors are accurate, where you don't have GPS. Doing that, evaluating these devices indoors is very challenging. And if you look at the literature, you would find two usual buckets of studies. One are lab studies where they bring the people into the lab. They have very accurate gold standard, but the subject is asked to do specific tasks, standardized tasks, walk on a treadmill, push something, etc. So these are not representative of daily living. So if your question is, if I put a device on a subject and send them home and look at how much they walked in a day, how accurate is that going to be? This doesn't really answer that. The other set of studies are done in natural environment, in home, etc. And there you have, obviously, they're representative of daily living, but you don't have a reliable gold standard. Usually what they do, they put an actigraph or another device on them, and they assume the other device is true, and then how accurate are you relative to that, which is a little bit of interesting approach. What we're doing is, as part of the study that I mentioned, we're trying to kind of bridge this gap and have subjects do realistic tasks in a natural environment and also use a true gold standard. And we're in the middle of data collection, so hopefully you'll invite me next year to talk about that, to talk about the results. But I just want to highlight a few things that you may want to consider, like doing experimentation on your device, like really understanding what your device is doing and where it's failing and when it's accurate is very crucial in making sure that your study is going to be successful. So this is preliminary results. I'm just quickly want to go through a few things to highlight examples. So here it's just like the variation between devices. So if you want to do a study and you combine a bunch of devices and you say, you know, if you have whatever watch that you have, or you have combined Apple Watch and Fitbit, etc., you may experience a lot of variation in your data that you don't want. This is just for climbing stairs, and I'm going very fast in the interest of time. And this is another example where I would basically wear the watch and I would just walk with in different patterns, varying speed variability, stride length, arm swing, rest, stops, how many times I stop in the middle. These are all 6-minute walk tests. You can see how many 6-minute walk tests I've done in the home. And you know, which arm you wear the device on. And you see a lot of variability. And if you correct, for example, for stride length, you would get a much better accuracy. The same thing holds with Fitbit. So this just highlights how much important getting its accurate stride length is if you are interested in measuring distance. So this is something if you don't pay attention to and you just put devices on subjects and send them home, you may get data back that may not be that useful. So I'll stop there.
Good morning. I'm going to talk about the COMPASS study next. So this is a project that is funded by a NIMH U01, and it's working in the area of mental health and working on integrating wearables. And I want to start with talking a little bit about, oh good, things are advancing, what problem we were trying to address with this study. So if anyone here has ever sought mental health care for themselves or for a family member, you're probably familiar with the fact that it can be a very long time before you can actually access care. Typically, at least 10 months here in the U of M system. Yes. So it's a huge gap in access. Part of what is causing that problem is that the way we currently give care is based on a lot of subjective recall over, of symptoms over your whole life. It is often based on just trying different treatments without any really matching or personalization until you happen to hit the one or the combinations of treatments that work for that person. And it's a pretty labor-intensive process that requires a lot of clinician time. So for the COMPASS study, and for some, I won't get into the details of the different funding streams that went into the study we have now, but we developed a process to try and address these problems of poor access to care and the lack of objective measurement going into care decisions and the lack of personalization by using technology. And our team has, over the last 4 years, developed methods for large-scale recruitment of patients who are on the waiting list for mental health care into these studies. So, and a lot of them are here. So hi, guys. Thank you for all of your excellent work on this project. They have recruited about 4,000 patients to date. And by the time we finish our current funding cycles, we will be at least another 5,000. So we identify people. We worked with Precision Health and with the IT folks to be able to identify people as they get scheduled for their first appointment, which is still about 6 to 8 weeks out after they've already been on the waiting list for a while. And we get that information the same day they're scheduled so that we're able to contact them by phone and email. And so this allows us to recruit in a large scale way, all remote. The participants can onboard themselves via mobile app. They receive a Fitbit. They do a saliva sample so we can do a genomic analysis around that precision matching. And then we track them for up to 12 months. As I mentioned, we use a Fitbit for this study. So I think you've heard from a number of people about the decisional balance of different devices you could use. And we've chosen to go with a Fitbit for its scalability because it's a cheaper device and it actually gives pretty high quality data around sleep in particular, which has been harder with devices that have poor battery life. We are planning to look at a lot of different measures, both things from daily measurement and in particular, the one active measure we have here is a daily mood assessment. The rest of this is passive. We are starting to do some work with sensor kit data, which Zhenke will present. That's really exciting. And also getting the granular data from the Fitbits. I wanted to mention just 2 preliminary studies that we're excited about in this area, and hopefully get people excited that if they'd like to work with us and work on this data, please reach out. We've been working on making it more readily accessible to the UVM community. So for this, we looked at people's baseline level of physical activity measured as step count, and whether that was a useful predictor of the comparative effectiveness of using a CBT app, which is SilverCloud, or a mindfulness app, which is Headspace. And what we see in this data is some suggestion with both, especially with anxiety symptoms, but also with depressive symptoms, that people get more benefit, so a greater reduction in symptoms, if they get mindfulness if they're less active, and CBT if they're more active. So we're starting to see a hint here that objective data from a wearable could be used to match patients to the treatment that they will get the most benefit from. Another study I wanted to mention, I've been working for a while in a method called target trial emulation, which typically uses electronic health records to benefit from the really, really large sample sizes that you can get that way. And you use the logic and decisions of a clinical trial to try and get the quality of data you would get from a clinical trial. But a problem with a lot of that is you're reliant on the poor quality data you get from electronic health record. So this is from an earlier analysis done with intern study data, which I think, Zhenke, you'll talk a little bit about as well. We don't need to get into the details. The differences between the study, they're very, very similar. But using the wearable data to measure exercise in a study of the causal effect of exercise on depression. And because this is in such a large sample, we can look at genetic predisposition to depression. So that's the polygenic risk score for major depression as a moderator of effect, which would be pretty much impossible to do in an actual clinical trial because of sample size. So overarching goals of this work is that we will match patients to treatments, empower patients and clinicians with objective data so they can have faster recovery, eventually lead to shorter wait lists, and improve population mental health. And with that, your slides don't appear to be here. I'm going to pass off to you anyway, though.
All right, so as you notice, I use the same theme as Amy's because that's very common, the green. And what I'm going to talk about briefly today is really representing a great many of our collaborators' substantive methodology that's who are here. And so I'm just going to introduce to you the concept of this, matching treatments to the right people at the right time. And this is called reinforcement learning. And reinforcement learning is really not an approach, but the goal. You're trying to reinforce certain good behaviors. So on the left, really, you can see this fake robot, and it's trying to take in the information from the state you observe in the world, make an action, and hopefully to reap some reward. And this process goes on. And an important question really is what to enter these vector states. So we will talk about that a bit later. But this entire system achieves 2 goals. The first one is trying to produce individualized treatment rules, so it's benefit people optimally over time. And second, it is trying to do the best for the entire population. So what this system for Compass for other studies is trying to do is really both for individualization and also for increase in the population level benefit. So it's like, as Asian as this coin is, it's really 2 sides of the same coin. I really want to emphasize that we are not just emphasizing one, but at the sacrifice of another. So then, in terms of constructing the states, right, where do these information come from? So the 2 speakers before me talk about the importance of collect various kinds of information, passive sensing, EMA, other kind of surveys. So really, I like to think, especially for people who work with very noisy data, who work in the missing data, we as observers or researchers, really these poor guys who are trained in the neck or in the foot to the wall, and all we see really are the shadows on the wall. And really what's going on are the objects carried by, higher beings, I guess. We only observe the shadows. So it's like, how can we really get to the thing we want to measure using noisy measurements? And I'm going to focus on one example. So this example is based on one ongoing study, internal study. One component of it is Apple sensor kit data. So what it measures are various things related to people's use of the phone, and one important component is the keyboard metrics. So I copied this slide from one of the working meetings among us, and it listed what are the information that's collected or not. So let's focus on what's collected. Those information include like typing speed, accuracy, typing errors, and also the screen orientation, and it also has a number of words, emojis, and sometimes emotion. And we dig a little bit into the data. So just to give you a sense, what is the kind of shadow we're dealing with? So on the left, this is one random person, from July 1st, which is the first day of the intern, for the entire month. So if you see a red block, that's the major sleeping episode in the previous evening. If you see those little thin blue lines, those represent the occurrence of a typing episode. So what do we mean by a typing episode? I may be like texting with a person, right? For like 8 rounds. Those are like 8 sessions. Or if you're using apps within relatively short period of time, they got considered an episode. So there could be more actual sessions happening within each blue bar. So this represents the kind of data you're dealing with. And also, let's focus on, say, one day. On the right, you can see that there are 5 different people. Look at the 4th person. This poor individual went to bed at 12:30 a.m., got up again at 4 a.m., and then went to bed again, or just taking a nap in the middle of the day. So what can we do with this data? We have various kind of measures, and typing speed, typing errors. Let's just say focus on the typing speed. And for each blue bar, right, we can measure how long this person has been awake, be it since the major sleeping episode in the morning, or be it since the end of the daytime napping. Say for the 4th person, there's a middle red block representing the daytime napping. And some preliminary analysis suggests such kind of relationship. So on the y-axis, this represents typing speed normalized by within each individual. So it's kind of a z-score to account for between people differences and across time variations. The red horizontal dash line 0, you're just typing on average. So the x-axis is time since awake, be it from the major sleeping episode or be it from the end of the daytime napping episode. So you can see that initially the person, this is a population plot, by the way. Initially, the person is typing relatively slowly compared to what this person would type at during the rest time of the day. So this could be due to synaptic inertia. Like when I first got up, I am a bit disoriented. It take you some time to get back into the daily rhythm, and after about 2 or 3 hours, the typing speed increases, and then that persists vary a little bit across the day. And if a person, say, has been awake for 14 hours, 30 hours, then the typing speed goes down quickly. And the reason why you have wider intervals towards the right is because this is really measured in naturalistic settings. I think that these interns are not being awake for 22 hours, 23 hours, which I hope is a good thing. That contributes to wider intervals. But this pattern is what we obtained from this sensor kit data. But what's the implication? So can we consider, is it useful to predict cognitive fatigue? So what is being done in the field? So this is called what's been done is called psychomotor vigilance test. You can try to Google this, and what it involves is that it will randomly show up a dot randomly in a location in this box. And you have to click it once you see it. The longer respond, the more impaired you will be considered. So on the right-hand side, you have you can see a figure that's kind of a bit blurry, but that's based on other studies that's keeping people awake for up to 60 hours in the lab. And you can see in the background, the line basically goes up, indicating that the longer a person is awake, the more impaired cognitive this person will be. And then we aligned, or we overlaid the two plots. Remember, in our case, we have speed, right? So the higher the speed, we consider maybe that's correlated to the higher cognitive ability, so we inverted it. And I don't know whether you can see it, but there is a general match in terms of trend. We stopped at 24 hours since awake because this is really a naturalistic setting. So we cannot ask these interns to be awake for like 60 hours, which I think surgeon will be like, in big trouble. So anyway, I did not get to talk about the final PRS subgroup analysis, but I hope this demonstrates the key message is that we have a lot of data that can inform the states. We just have the sensor kit data from EHR, data from other kind of contextual settings will also be useful. The question is, how do we do that? How do we do that in a timely fashion? And hopefully this opens a conversation for people who want to employ certain reinforcement and technique and try to dive very deep on certain biomarkers. Thank you.
I have a question for Amy. So can you talk to us a little bit about, so COMPASS kind of blows my mind because it's not just research, you're also interfacing with Michigan medicine. So can you talk to us a little bit about developing the infrastructure for that and what were some of the lessons learned and some of the negative things maybe that happened in case the rest of us are going through that?
It's a great question. We were fortunate to have really good clinical partners who were more than happy to have us reaching out to every single patient who was getting scheduled for a mental health appointment. You certainly hear of situations where there's a lot of kind of within a clinical department competition for research subjects, and we fortunately were lucky to be in a situation where that was not the issue. I do think it was also important then to basically ask nothing of them after that. Other than like kind of the being agreeable to us reaching out to participants. I think it both results in a lot of selection effects that are not good for the study and slows your recruitment if you're reliant on clinicians to make the referral to research. So I think figuring out, and much credit to Precision Health for this and for all the investments that the Michigan Medicine has put into IT infrastructure in general, figuring out how to get those lists of eligible patients with their contact information on the same day so that we can reach out to them right away was, I think, really critical to being able to do this at the scale that it has worked to be able to do. Also figuring out how to make the team has developed a lot of protocols and systems to be able to make it as easy as possible for patients and being able to both adapt to the patient who wants to not talk to a human ever and do everything themselves, and have the systems in place for the patient who wants to be on the phone going through every step with someone. So that, both, I think we all probably identify with one end of the spectrum or the other and can see how if you set up a system that only works with one type, you're going to end up with a smaller sample and less less generalizability, less effectiveness as a project. I do think, the next step for this line of work will be figuring out how to get the data back that we're collecting into the clinic in order to inform care and testing those kinds of systems. So there are, I'm sure, many more lessons to be learned on how to do that clinical research integration.
Can you hear me? No. I can also comment on that. On the EHR side of it, we do work a lot with the EHR and deploy models, etc. in a different world. There are ways you can gain access to the EHR, like specifically through Clarity, which is like basically a database that is a copy of the Michigan Medicine EHR every night. So unless if you don't need real-time data, that's the way to go. But you need to, if that's really something that you're going to do a lot of research on, that's something you may want to hire someone and have them, so either with Clarity certificate or someone who can gain that certificate. So that's an investment. So people at Precision Health and Data Office who would help you with that, that's what they have, and that's what they use. So.
Thank you. This is a fascinating series of talks. As a clinical psychologist, we're often thinking about therapeutic feedback. So gathering this data, curating it, kind of creating a narrative or sharing it back with patients. Can you talk a little bit about either where your teams are at with sharing this information back to people, and then the level of impact that might have on both the therapeutic relationship, but then also how does this impact treatment, or how does this impact their behavior? If that series of questions makes sense.
Can you actually say a little bit more about what kind of data and information you're thinking would be most useful to feedback?
Yeah, great question. So I work in a pediatric pain clinic. And so one of the questions we have is how active are people, and then how that activity leads to mood changes, behavioral changes, kind of behavioral activation. So if we could share a trend line, for example, on mood and its interaction with physical activity, share that back with the patient and say, look, it appears as though this is your trend line. How does that impact their motivation maybe to engage in more activity? And how can we best show that or visualize that to people? And so that's why I'm curious what your teams are thinking about in terms of that line of sharing back with patients.
Okay, thanks. You could not have set me up better. I want to be clear that he was not a plant. Our study app actually, we have a patient-facing dashboard that does exactly what you describe. So we have those daily mood scores, and we have created a system that creates summaries of, based on how people slept and how active they were, what that correlates with their mood for that day. So we have generated that. We've done a little bit of preliminary analysis looking at the effectiveness of whether if we give a patient access to that feedback or not, whether it seems to make a difference in outcomes. And if that's something of interest, would love to work with you on it. We haven't yet studied the effect and haven't yet tested out giving that dashboard to the clinician as well as something to generate conversation between the patient and the clinician. And I think that would be really interesting. And I do think a lot of what we've worked out for this mental health context would be really interesting in the pain context too, because of the similarities in drivers of variation and in mood and in pain and those types of things. So thank you. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So the point that people are curious, regarding the interventions delivered by text messages, I just want to to plug in that here. So in the past, we have implemented a system where every day we can, randomly send out a message, say related to mood or physical activity or sleep or not. And then we can do this over multiple days. And then it's not hard to imagine that every day, because of randomization, you can estimate the causal effect of these text messages. And what we observe is that in general, these text messages do provide effect of, say, making people walk more at around like 200 steps more on average every day. And that effect seems to persist for a few weeks. and then it will approach 0. And there are lots of reasons for that preliminary findings, and that's why I feel very excited that people are talking about pausing or consider patient preferences over time. The reasons could be, as Peja talked about, it's like habituation to the messages, and people tends to be like, hey, I'm super excited in the first 2 weeks, but after that, life happens, and then I don't care. The second thing which people usually talk about is like the learning effect, right? So if you read Peja's message, those are really good messages. If you have learned it and even doing it without receiving the message, then it will create a situation where treated versus untreated will be more similar because you're practicing it even if you're not receiving the good messages. So the effect also may tend to decrease. So I think that to me is a good thing because you have learned some good behaviors over time. But I think overall, final comment is that how do we sort of adapt over time to incorporate patient preference, to introduce some kind of break, or to help with sustaining that treatment effect. So that will be something that's really important in the upcoming studies.
Do we have time for me? Okay, good. Talk me down from the ledge. When it comes to device validation, when we are trying to validate devices we don't own with firmware and software that we can't control.
Very good question. We can't even validate them when they're all the same device and or show that they're accurate when they are on the same iOS and the same exact device, etc. So you got to do experiments in the lab. I mean, I don't know how you would do this in the wild and try to where you would get your gold standard. So that's where things get tricky, and you have so many different possibilities of versions and device models and manufacturers. So I don't have a good answer on how to do it. I can just tell you it's very difficult to do.
And so, I mean, in our research teams, we've kind of taken two different approaches. We've said that when we are assessing health outcomes, that we give people these devices, and we're obviously going to run our calculations pre and post. But then we hold against a clinical gold standard like a 6-minute walk test, for example. And so we report out the steps on the Fitbit, but our actual clinical outcome is a 6-minute walk test because that is a controlled situation, right? The other approach we've taken is, well, it's interperson reliability. If I've given you the device and you're wearing that same device with your equipment for 12 months, then it's not that the device is necessarily accurate that you've walked 6,000 steps, but your change should be reliable from your pre and post, even if that number is not correct. What are your thoughts, and which should we be leaning towards? Or should we be saying, no, we really do need to be validating these devices?
Yeah, I mean, if you have a trend that's long enough, I think you would probably can transcend the noise that is introduced by the device itself, but it has to be pretty long. Right. It's the results that we have are preliminary, so we're in the middle of the study. But it seems like the errors are pretty large. So if you're looking at one measurement or two measurements, the odds that your effect size is so large that can transcend that, it's pretty small. But if you're looking at someone over 12 months and you're looking at a very long trend, and you have them do 6-minute walk tests, I don't know, once a week, then you're much more likely to be able to show something.
I would add too, and Kathy, I know you know a lot on this topic, so it'd be great to have you comment as well. I think I agree with the within-person change being important. I think in the types of sample sizes we want to do this work in, even if you don't have the most precise measurement, you're still set up to pick up on between-person differences that are meaningful. I think it's also important to keep in mind how the data is being used, and I think sometimes we treat the validation or the precision as equally important for all uses, but I don't think that's true, right? Like we're not making diagnoses based on step count per day. It's data that's coming in to help us understand what a patient in naturalistic settings or patients in large numbers. And I think that I think sometimes our drive for exact precision is being a little misimplied to that use.
So I will echo what Amy said, and that was the first thing I thought about when you brought this up, is that, and I think the field and, importantly, all of our funding agencies and our people reviewing our papers and the editors are starting to get a handle on this. So wearable tracked anything is an entirely different construct than any traditional research tool. So we have to, so when I hear people talk about validation, like if you think about sleep, the way our gold standard definition of sleep is by electroencephalogram. So it's brainwave activity. So we are looking at a complete proxy with movement and cardiac autonomic activity. So that is not the same thing as EEG REM sleep. And that used to make me crazy. And I'd yell at my patients about it because they're like, I'm only getting 10 minutes of REM a night. But also when you think about it, maybe we shouldn't be trying to exactly approach EEG defined sleep with these devices. So we have to kind of consider what they're monitoring and the benefits of what we're monitoring, because it is so scalable and you can monitor it such a longitudinal fashion, as an entirely different metric with understood limitations. And then there's obviously things everyone should know about documenting their software, using an effective time so you can see as things change over time if that's affecting your measurement. And definitely agree with the intra-individual changes as well are quite powerful.
I also want to augment my argument a little bit. So I'm narrowly talking about activity and things like heart rate, things like sleep. I haven't studied, so I can't make any comments about that. And the other thing that you want to consider is the granularity of the things that you're trying to measure. So if you're interested in an aggregate measure of walking over a week, probably fine. But someone like me is interested in hour by hour or even minute by minute activity. And there the variability is so huge. I was actually planning to do a very cute experiment that I totally forgot about. I looked at how many steps I had walked at the beginning of my talk, and it was around 1,050. When I sat down here, it was 1,300 something. So if anyone wants to burn some calories, come up here. But when I look at the same thing over a day, it's a little bit better. Mm-hmm. So, also depends on how granular you want your data to be.
Thank you.
As kind of a quick follow-up on the trend, has there been any indication of how much drift there is in the sensors, both short-term with regard to charge and long-term with regard to its sensing? Does the sensing actually change over time for these devices?
What kind of time horizon do you mean?
So the values coming from the sensor could, over time, in the short term, based on charge for the device, but also over the life of the device, it could be measuring differently over time. Right. So if we're depending on trends to get through noise, that's adding a confounding factor to that. Just wondered if any studies have been done on that.
Not to my knowledge. I'd be curious if others do. My sense just from personal use is those factors tend to become a bigger issue over a couple years of use of it. And our studies typically, are like a year. But I think that will be important to think about more as some of this translation to using them in clinical practice with people's own devices from home happens, right? So thank you.